A young woman gives a homeless old man some change. Unexpectedly, he is the owner of the most famous luxury chain in Manhattan. Now he returns with a life-changing gift. On a bright but chilly morning in New York City, the usual hustle and bustle of the streets filled the air. Among the crowds of people rushing to their destinations was Jasmine, a young woman in her 20s. Jasmine was an employee at a small convenience store, earning just enough to get by, but despite her modest means, she possessed a heart overflowing with compassion. She was known in her neighborhood as someone who always offered a helping hand or a warm smile to those in need, whether she knew them or not. Jasmine had grown up understanding the struggles of life. Her family had never been wealthy, and she knew what it was like to go without. However, instead of making her bitter, those experiences had made her empathetic, and she often found herself reaching into her own pocket to give what little she could spare. She believed that kindness was the most valuable thing she could offer, and she practiced it with an open heart. That day, as she made her way to work, Jasmine's attention was caught by a commotion up ahead. A group of young men was laughing loudly, and as Jasmine drew closer, she saw why. An older man, appearing frail and worn, was lying on the sidewalk, struggling to get up. His clothes were tattered, his face was lined with hardship, and it was clear from his appearance that he was homeless. The young men had apparently shoved him, and now they were walking away, laughing and exchanging amused glances. Jasmine's heart sank at the sight. Without a second thought, she quickened her pace and knelt down beside the man. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked gently, reaching out to help him to his feet. His hands were cold, his body weak, and he seemed surprised to see someone showing him kindness. Jasmine supported him as he stood, and she could see the weariness in his eyes, a kind of tiredness that went beyond physical fatigue. As the man steadied himself, Jasmine reached into her bag and pulled out a few crumpled bills and some coins, offering them to him. "Here, it's not much, but please, take it. You shouldn't have to go through this alone," she said softly, her voice full of sincerity. The man looked down at the money, then back up at her, his eyes filling with an emotion Jasmine couldn't quite place. Perhaps gratitude, perhaps disbelief. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. There was a pause before he added, "People, they don't usually stop. They just walk by." Jasmine gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Well, that's not right. Everyone deserves a little kindness," she replied. She didn't dwell on the thought of what he might use the money for or why he was in such a situation. In her mind, he was just a human being who needed help. With one last comforting smile, she patted his shoulder and continued on her way to work, leaving the man standing there, still clutching the small gift she had offered. As Jasmine walked away, she didn't realize the impact she had made. To her, it was a simple gesture, a few dollars, a kind word, a moment of compassion. But to the older man, her kindness was a beacon of hope, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He stood watching her as she disappeared into the crowd, his heart heavy with gratitude and a touch of amazement. The kindness of this young woman had stirred something deep within him, something he had never felt before. Unbeknownst to Jasmine, the man she had helped was not just any homeless individual. He was Robert Langston, once the proud owner of Manhattan's most luxurious chain of stores. A series of devastating events had turned his life upside down, leaving him destitute and forced to navigate the harsh reality of life on the streets. However, in that moment, Jasmine's kindness sparked a change within him, a reminder that perhaps, despite everything, there was still humanity left in the world. Jasmine continued her day as usual, unaware that her small act of kindness had set into motion a chain of events that would eventually come back to her in ways she could never imagine. As Robert watched Jasmine walk away that morning, a mixture of emotions filled his heart. It wasn't often that he received kindness from strangers, and Jasmine's gentle words and gesture had left him in a state of quiet contemplation. Standing alone with the few bills she had given him, Robert couldn't help but look back on the man he used to be, the man who had once lived in luxury, surrounded by wealth and power. Years before, Robert Langston was a name spoken with respect in the circles of New York's elite. Known for his business acumen and sharp instincts, he had built one of the most successful luxury retail chains in Manhattan, offering exclusive, high-end products that catered to the wealthiest clients. His stores were frequented by celebrities, influential politicians, and top executives, and his life was filled with all the trappings of success: a sprawling penthouse, luxury cars, designer suits, and invitations to every high-profile event. Yet, beneath this image of success lay a hidden truth. The relentless pursuit of wealth and status had left Robert feeling empty and isolated. His devotion to his business had cost him his family, friendships, and peace of mind. Though he'd accumulated wealth, he had sacrificed countless relationships along the way, choosing power over personal connection time and time again. It all came crashing down in a single year. A combination of ill-advised investments and a major lawsuit, spurred by accusations of unethical practices from a competitor, shook his empire to its core. His once loyal investors pulled out, and as the lawsuits piled up, so did his debts. It was as though every mistake he had made over the years came back to haunt him at once. The empire he had spent decades building crumbled faster than he could save it. As the reality of his situation set in, Robert tried to salvage what was left, but the financial burden became overwhelming. His wealth disappeared, his properties were seized, and one by one his stores closed down. The final blow came when he had to sell his penthouse, his last remaining sanctuary. With no family left to turn to, and his reputation in shambles, Robert was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the memories of a life that felt as if it had belonged to someone else. Now, living on the streets was a harsh reality he had never thought he'd experience. The proud, self-assured man he once was had been replaced by someone who struggled just to find food and shelter. The streets of Manhattan, once his playground, had become a place of survival. Each day he witnessed the indifference of people who passed by, barely noticing him. The very city he had contributed to and been celebrated in had become a place of isolation. Robert found himself haunted by his past decisions, replaying them in his mind, asking himself if it had all been worth it. His wealth had bought him comfort and admiration, but in the end, it had all faded away. He was just another face among the countless forgotten individuals on the streets. He had learned the hard way that money couldn't shield him from the consequences of his actions, or fill the void left by a life devoid of genuine connection. That morning, Jasmine's act of kindness had shaken him to the core. It was rare for anyone to treat him with compassion. Most people, if they looked at him at all, looked with pity or disgust. But Jasmine had been different. Her gaze had held warmth, her smile sincerity. She hadn't just handed him money, she had shown him humanity. In that small moment, he felt more seen than he had in years. Her kindness lingered in his mind, like a light piercing through the dense fog of regret that had settled over him. The more he thought about Jasmine, the more he realized that her simple gesture had stirred something deep within him. He began to reflect on the choices he'd made and the man he had become. Had he always been so blind to the struggles of those less fortunate? Had he been so absorbed in his own world of success that he had forgotten the importance of compassion? Robert spent the next few days wandering the streets, unable to shake the memory of Jasmine's kindness. He replayed their interaction, seeing in her a glimpse of what he had lost, a genuine, caring heart, unburdened by ambition or greed. He realized that he had missed countless opportunities to help others, choosing instead to chase after wealth and power. In her simplicity and humility, Jasmine embodied a type of strength that he hadn't recognized before, a strength that came from kindness, not material wealth. As he sat on a bench late one evening, staring at the city lights in the distance, Robert made a silent vow to himself. If he could ever reclaim even a fraction of what he had lost, he would live differently. He would find a way to thank Jasmine for her kindness, to let her know that her compassion had rekindled a sense of hope within him, a hope he hadn't felt in a very long time. Robert didn't know how he would make this promise a reality, but he clung to the belief that life, in its unpredictable way, might just give him the chance. Over the weeks that followed their first encounter, Jasmine would often catch glimpses of Robert around her neighborhood. Each time she saw him, he looked more frail and worn than before, his clothes further tattered, his figure slightly more hunched. He was usually perched on a street corner or sitting on a park bench, clutching his coat close for warmth. Although his face bore the exhaustion of a life filled with hardship, his eyes would always brighten slightly whenever he recognized her in the crowd. Each time she saw him, Jasmine's heart was touched by a familiar sympathy. Without hesitation, she would approach him, offer a warm greeting, and, if she could spare it, a few dollars or some food from her bag. Sometimes, she'd bring an extra sandwich or a small cup of soup she'd picked up from a nearby deli, knowing he'd appreciate a warm meal. She didn't ask many questions. To her, Robert was simply a person in need, someone who deserved respect and a little bit of kindness, just like anyone else. One chilly afternoon, Jasmine spotted Robert sitting near a corner cafe, visibly shivering. She had just finished a long shift, and the exhaustion was pulling her shoulders down, but she couldn't bear to see him suffering alone. She hurried over, pulling off her own scarf as she approached. Without a word, she wrapped it around his neck, tucking it in to shield him from the wind. She handed him a steaming cup of tea she'd just bought and sat down beside him on the cold pavement, joining him in the quiet bustle of the city around them. "Thank you, Jasmine," he murmured, his hands trembling slightly as he held the warm cup. "You don't have to do all this for me, you know." Jasmine smiled, her face softened by a gentleness that he had rarely encountered in his life. "Everyone deserves a bit of warmth," she replied. "And besides, it's the least I can do. I wish there was more, honestly." Her words struck a deep chord within Robert. This young woman, who by no means had an easy life, was willing to share what little she had with him without a second thought. The humility and grace she showed were unlike anything he had ever seen, even in his days as a wealthy businessman. Back then, he was surrounded by people, yet none had shown him the genuine kindness Jasmine offered without hesitation. As the days went by, Jasmine continued her acts of kindness without expectation. She'd sometimes slip him a sandwich, or a few coins, or simply a smile and a warm greeting. Though she struggled with her own challenges, her support for Robert was unyielding. For her, it was instinctual. Helping others wasn't about earning praise or gratitude. It was about giving back to the world, even if only in small ways. With each encounter, Robert found himself increasingly touched by Jasmine's unrelenting kindness. Her actions forced him to confront the man he once was, a man who had wealth beyond measure, yet seldom offered a helping hand. As a businessman, he had been highly respected, but was often feared or resented for his ruthlessness. He'd once been too absorbed in his own success to notice the plight of others. Now stripped of everything, he was experiencing humanity's compassion from someone who, by all accounts, had every reason to ignore him. One evening, as he lay in a makeshift shelter under a bridge, Robert thought long and hard about Jasmine's generosity. He remembered the days when he could have easily helped countless people, yet he had chosen to focus on growing his empire instead. If he'd been half as selfless as Jasmine, how many lives could he have touched? How different would his life be now if he'd spent his days giving rather than taking? The realization gnawed at him, yet it also ignited a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He decided then and there that, if he ever got the chance, he would find a way to thank Jasmine for her kindness in a way that she would never expect. Although he was still trapped in his current circumstances, he clung to a newfound sense of hope and determination. Unbeknownst to Jasmine, her repeated acts of compassion had sown the seeds of a transformation within Robert. Her kindness was gradually rekindling his belief in human goodness, something he had long abandoned. As days turned into weeks, Robert began to form a plan in his mind. Although he had nothing to give now, he held on to a glimmer of hope that he might someday repay her, not only for the meals and warmth she had provided, but for giving him a reason to believe in life again. One day, when Jasmine stopped by to offer him another sandwich and some change, he took her hand gently. "Jasmine," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have no idea what your kindness has meant to me. One day, I hope I'll be able to thank you properly." Jasmine chuckled lightly, brushing off his words. "There's no need for that, Mr. Robert. Just take care of yourself, okay? That's all I need to know." She said it with such sincerity that Robert couldn't help but smile, but even as she walked away, he held on to his promise. He would find a way to honor her kindness, to show her the profound impact she had made on his life. And with that determination, a new spark ignited within him, one that would lead him down a path he hadn't foreseen. Jasmine's kindness had reminded him of the value of people, not possessions, a lesson that, in time, he would make sure to repay in full. Months had passed since Jasmine's first encounter with Robert, and although she still occasionally saw him around, it was clear that something had changed. He appeared less frequently on the street corners, and when he did, there was a quiet confidence about him, as though he were carrying a secret he had yet to reveal. What Jasmine didn't know was that Robert's life had taken a significant turn. Through a stroke of luck and the support of a friend from his former life, Robert had slowly begun to rebuild his fortune. His old friend, a former business partner who had remained loyal over the years, had discovered that Robert's financial situation wasn't beyond repair. With his guidance, Robert was able to reclaim some of his previous investments, and over time, he managed to salvage a portion of his lost wealth. With this newfound stability, Robert reclaimed his ownership of the luxury retail chain he once owned, albeit on a smaller scale. The return to wealth and influence felt strangely surreal to him. It was as though he was revisiting an old life that no longer fit. Yet he hadn't forgotten the lessons he had learned during his time on the streets, or the kindness that Jasmine had shown him when he had nothing. Robert knew he wanted to thank her in a way that would honor the compassion she had shown him, but he was determined to do it in a way that would surprise her. Now that he had reestablished himself, he planned a special evening, one that he hoped would convey his gratitude while also giving her the opportunity to see him as he truly was. One day, a small, elegant envelope appeared in Jasmine's mailbox. Inside was a formal invitation to an exclusive event at one of Manhattan's grandest hotels. The invitation was unsigned, leaving Jasmine perplexed. She couldn't recall ever receiving anything so luxurious, and she certainly couldn't imagine who would send it. Though she felt a mix of curiosity and hesitation, she ultimately decided to attend, intrigued by the mystery of it all. The evening of the event arrived, and Jasmine stepped into the opulent hotel lobby, feeling out of place in the grandeur surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the marble floors, and the sound of a string quartet filled the air with a gentle, refined melody. She was scanning the room, feeling slightly self-conscious, when her gaze landed on a familiar figure. There, standing near the center of the ballroom in an impeccably tailored suit, was Robert. Her heart skipped a beat, as she took in his transformation. The man before her bore little resemblance to the homeless figure she had befriended on the streets. He exuded an air of confidence and poise, holding himself with a quiet strength that made it clear he belonged among New York's elite. For a moment, Jasmine couldn't believe her eyes. Robert approached her with a warm, genuine smile. "Jasmine," he said, his voice carrying a note of warmth she recognized instantly. "Thank you for coming." Still in shock, Jasmine managed to find her voice. "Mr. Robert, I don't understand. What is all of this?" Robert gestured for her to sit with him at a nearby table, where he began to explain everything. He recounted his fall from grace, how he had lost his fortune, and the journey that had led him to the streets. He told her about the series of mistakes and losses that had stripped him of everything he once held dear, leaving him with nothing but regrets. He described the loneliness and humiliation he had endured, and how he'd come to view the world with a sense of hopelessness until he met her. "Jasmine, you changed my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't know who I was, but you treated me with kindness and dignity when I had nothing. Your generosity reminded me of what truly matters, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. You gave me hope in a way I didn't think was possible." Jasmine listened in stunned silence.